Turkmenistan is a Central Asian country that's long been one of the most closed-off places in the world. And even now, it's hard to get real footage of everyday life from there. This huge, gas-rich former Soviet republic is known for its unique personality cult around its first president, Saparmurat Niyazov. Back in the day, he was one of the most totalitarian, tyrannical, and repressive dictators in the world. But besides always tightening the screws, he's always remembered for all kinds of antics that, well, you could call pretty weird. Like renaming months, for example. In 2002, the Turkmen government passed a law to rename all the months and most days of the week. But that was only half of the problem. The real kicker lay in the names. January was called Turkmenbasi, meaning the leader of the Turkmen. That was the title Niyazov had given himself. April was named after Niyazov's mother, Gurban Sultan. With this in mind, Niyazov declaring the second Sunday of August Melon Day just because he loves melons? It seems almost normal. Luckily, in 2008, 2 years after his death, the old names were restored. At least those decrees were harmless, unlike closing hospitals. Back in 2005, Niyazov shut down all rural hospitals outside Ashgabat, the capital. And this in a country where over half the population at the time lived in the countryside? The reason? One day he declared if people are sick, they can just come to Ashgabat. The same fate befell rural libraries because ordinary Turkmens don't read at all. By the way, before that, in 2004, Niyazov fired doctors and gym instructors and replaced them with army conscripts. Why? Just because. No wonder Turkmenistan had the shortest life expectancy in Central Asia during Niyazov's presidency. And believe me, that's far from the end of it. I'll say more. These insane, harmful, and scary decisions are only a drop in the bucket when it comes to what makes Turkmenistan such a weird dictatorship. But before we keep going, I need a bucket of coffee. Just an unobtrusive reminder not to forget to hit that like button if it tends to slip your mind after watching. And thanks for you-know-what. All right, what's the deal with the bans? Back in 2005, Niyazov banned phonograms at public concerts, as well as recorded music during musical performances on state holidays and on Turkmen TV shows. Even in crowded places, weddings, and celebrations, phonograms were forbidden, because apparently it had a negative effect on the development of music. Niyazov banished the dogs from Ashgabat because of their unappealing odor, and banned people from owning more than one cat or dog. He also got rid of the Turkmen word for bread and replaced it with Gurban Sultan, his mother's name. Yep, April and bread ended up having the same name. In 2001, Niyazov banned opera, ballet, circuses, and philharmonic orchestras, saying they were decidedly un-Turkmen-like. And in February 2004, he decided men shouldn't have long hair or beards anymore. He also banned mentioning or even bringing up contagious diseases like AIDS or cholera. By presidential decree, reporters and news anchors weren't allowed to wear makeup on air. You know, that professional stuff they use on everyone in TV studios? And every broadcast started with a pledge that the anchor's tongue would shrivel up if they ever dared to slander the country, the flag, or the president. All right, I'll give you a few seconds to wrap your head around this brilliant decision. All right then, moving on. Niyazov banned car radios because he thought they were useless. Video games got outlawed too since they were too violent for young Turkmens. In November 2005, Niyazov ordered doctors to swear on oath to him instead of the Hippocratic Oath because, well, why not? Oh, and he also told the country's oil minister to learn English in 6 months or he'd get fired. Niyazov's love for himself deserves a special mention. He put his face on rugs, vodka bottles, and watches. He even launched his own perfume brand. When he dyed his hair black, he made it illegal to own watches showing him with gray hair. If you feel like nervously laughing, I do too. I guess I can stop the list here. Not because I've covered all the weird stuff he did, but you've probably already figured out what kind of person he was and what life was like under his rule. Anyway, there are a couple more notable initiatives worth mentioning. One of them is the Walk of Health, a 22-mile paved pedestrian path. It was built on Niyazov's orders to help keep the population healthy. As part of this health program, the dictator forced his ministers to walk it once a year, though he himself never participated in the walk and instead flew by helicopter to the summit. This was because, according to Niyazov, his heart was too weak for such climbs. And considering that the president died of a heart attack, he wasn't lying. The trail runs along the Kopet-Dag Ridge, just a short distance from Ashgabat, and it was officially opened in 2000. It was expected that not only ministers, but regular people would have to walk this trail to get healthier. However, the effect turned out to be quite the opposite. Walking on a concrete stairway for 22 miles without any visible shade in one of the harshest climates on Earth is a health risk. It's no wonder that after the annual march, many employees take sick leave. However, this doesn't mean that the path isn't used anymore. Hikes take place every year, and mass sports events are held here as well. It might seem like Niyazov really cared about the health of the population. He even banned smoking in all public places and ordered all government employees to quit cigarettes. However, this happened in 1997, when Niyazov himself had to quit smoking after undergoing heart surgery. So what? If the president can't, then neither can anyone else. Although this ban has achieved a certain goal, today Turkmenistan is the country with the lowest percentage of smokers in the world. Well, now it's probably time to talk about some harsh stuff. Every year during harvest time, Turkmenistan calls up tens of thousands of government workers, students, and even soldiers to pick cotton, the country's biggest source of income after oil and natural gas. This is forced labor, and you can't opt out of it. Students are threatened with disciplinary penalties or expulsion. Occasionally, there are reports of child labor. School teachers and medical workers spend their summer vacation in July and early August working in the fields, helping farmers pull weeds and doing other tasks. It's really hard work, 12 hours a day in the scorching heat, and the government doesn't even provide people with drinking water. Of course, this forced labor in cotton picking is a leftover from the Soviet economy, and they're not willing to let go of it. But what dictatorship is complete without propaganda? President Niyazov was persistent and systematic in creating his cult of personality, and a good example of this work is the book called Runama. It was written by Niyazov himself and published in 2001. The title Runama translates from Turkmen as the Book of the Soul, and the dictator referred to it as the moral constitution of the Turkmen. He made the book mandatory for study in schools, universities, and government offices. Even people applying for jobs had to take a test on this book. Moreover, local bookstores and government buildings were required to display it prominently. Residents were ordered to read the Runama every day. To get a driver's license, you had to pass an exam on the Runama. Niyazov once claimed that God himself told him that anyone who reads the book will go straight to heaven. That's why the dictator ordered the book to be kept in all mosques and even went so far as to write verses from the Runama and the Quran on the biggest mosque in Turkmenistan, the Turkmenbashi Ruhi Mosque. Niyazov faced sharp criticism from the Muslim population, but no one dared to openly oppose him. The importance of the book was emphasized by its statue. Yep, a statue of a book. Why not? A massive one. And when it gets dark in the square, the cover of the monument opens and the first page becomes a screen showing a documentary about the birth of the nation. They even sent the Runama into space in 2005, and it's expected to orbit Earth for the next 150 years. But what's this book even about? It's commonly believed that it was created as a tool for state propaganda. Scholars note that the Runama is like a mosaic of different literary genres. There are spiritual and political teachings, legends, and even the author's autobiography with loads of details along with short stories, poems, and even a Turkmen history that's disconnected from reality. Well, at least there are no references to verified historical sources. But Niyazov claimed that Turkmens invented the wheel, carts, learned to smelt metal, and created 70 states across Eurasia. And once again, no one dared to challenge it. What else should we mention? Of course, golden statues. They can be seen in public squares all over the country. Niyazov was depicted either standing or sitting on a throne, and all these statues were put up by the dictator himself. If anyone ever tells you that you have an inflated sense of self-worth, just think of Niyazov. Besides statues, there were giant billboards with the leader's face everywhere. Though he often pretended to be embarrassed by all this admiration, I am personally against seeing my pictures and statues in the streets, but it's what the people want, he once said. What a humble guy. By the way, Ashgabat holds a strange Guinness World Record for the highest density of buildings covered in white marble. White's actually a really popular color at the state level. The next president after Niyazov, Berdimuhamedov, lived in a white palace and cruised around the city in a white limousine. Despite all the white beauty, today modern Ashgabat is jokingly called the City of the Dead because in the new marble neighborhoods, it's almost impossible to see people. There's a bunch of the world's largest stuff here, and all these records, buildings, parks, and roads were supposedly built for people. The thing is, there are no people. And that's because Niyazov started pushing the idea of his own superiority and began reshaping Ashgabat to his liking. Dozens of historic landmarks were destroyed, hundreds of houses torn down. In their place, towering buildings covered in white marble were built. Nearly all the old trees were cut down, replaced by evergreens that aren't suited for the dry climate and don't offer much shade. New highways were laid out, and the irrigation system of canals that created a unique microclimate for the city was almost completely wiped out. Where the old T-spots used to be, now there are parking lots or just barren land. No wonder the revamped neighborhoods just died off. But you've probably noticed that we're showing you some pretty stunning footage of the country. Unfortunately, that's because getting your hands on the real shots, the unofficial ones, is nearly impossible. So just remember, this is just a pretty picture for the foreigners. But you might be wondering, how did Turkmenistan even get to this point? After all, a dictatorship doesn't just appear out of nowhere. There must be some reasons behind it, and there were. Modern Turkmenistan was radically transformed by the invasion of the Russian Empire, which conquered and annexed the region at the end of the 19th century. Later, the Russian Revolution of 1917 turned Turkmenistan from an Islamic nomadic tribal society into an industrial and urban republic, a typical Soviet one. Independence came to Turkmenistan in 1991, and it was then that Saparmurat Niyazov, a former member of the local branch of the Communist Party, declared himself the absolute president for life, taking the title of Turkmenbashi. This is how Turkmenistan, which had just gained its independence and hadn't yet tasted freedom, turned into a totalitarian conservative dictatorship. There simply wasn't enough time for democracy. Sure, there's a transition of power in Turkmenistan, but it's quite unique. Niyazov led the country for 15 years, and after his death on December 21, 2006, the presidential chair was taken by Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov. There were elections, but there was no opposition, no political competition, and not a hint of intrigue. Berdimuhamedov repealed many of Niyazov's political decisions, including the all-pervasive cult of personality and the country's almost complete international isolation. But then he started building his own cult. In March 2022, that is 15 years later, the president was replaced by his son, and he added a dynastic rule to Turkmenistan's problems. Yes, his appointment was accompanied by elections, but they were just as undemocratic as the ones before, a mere imitation of democracy. This altogether makes Turkmenistan a country where freedoms are even more limited than in North Korea. And I'm not throwing around big words here. There are officially recognized global criteria for freedom in a country. For example, they assess people's access to political rights and civil liberties. This includes the right to vote, freedom of expression, and equality before the law. Basically the basics. So based on these criteria, a list of countries was made, and Turkmenistan is at the very bottom of it. It's literally in second to last place. The only countries in worse shape are Syria, South Sudan, and Palestine. And Palestine didn't even get its own rating. Finland ranks first in freedom with 100 points out of 100. New Zealand and Sweden follow in second with 99 points each. In general, countries with scores above 90 are mostly from Europe, and then, for example, Japan, Australia, and Canada. Turkmenistan just got a score of 2 points out of 100. To put it into perspective, North Korea scored 3 points, so its citizens are a bit freer than those in Turkmenistan. All right, this part's clear. Now, what about the second president? Well, as I said, when he came to power, Berdimuhamedov put an end to the cult of personality of his predecessor. He allowed internet cafes, lifted the ban on foreign operas, and increased the number of years children spend in school. He also improved ties with the West. But all these reforms didn't lead to democratization. Experts explain the changes more by the fact that the new president belonged to a new generation and understood that Turkmenistan couldn't live in complete isolation from the outside world. So he kind of changed things, but not everything, and not completely. For example, many golden statues of the first president were taken down, but in their place, portraits of the new one appeared in government buildings. Berdimuhamedov built a new palace, tearing down dozens of houses to do it, and shut down a whole street for the public, turning it into his private boulevard. On any central street the president might travel, it's forbidden to open windows, install air conditioners or satellite dishes, or hang clothes. I guess it's to avoid ruining his view. Also, Berdi Muhammadov built an international bus station. Not bad, right? Of course. The only thing is, in its first 5 years, this bus station didn't serve a single international route. A new airport was built, for which an entire village was demolished. An international human rights organization counted about 10,000 buildings that were torn down, where about 50,000 people used to live. What was the reason for the demolition? The president was worried that foreigners would see the unappealing everyday life of ordinary Turkmens from the windows of arriving planes. So even though the completely absurd laws were repealed, people haven't gained any real rights or freedoms. Many messengers are banned, Wi-Fi is almost non-existent, and internet access is heavily restricted. At the same time, most websites are blocked except for local ones which are accessible only through Turkmenet, a censored version of the internet that exists only in Turkmen. Good news, in Turkmenistan you can drive any car you want, but only if it's white or silver. Black cars were banned, and it wasn't just a matter of telling everyone to paint their cars, they actually gathered and towed all the wrong ones to a parking lot. Only later did the owners start getting their cars back, but first they had to sign a document that required them to repaint their vehicles in white or a similar color. This order from the federal government immediately doubled or even tripled the prices at the local auto shops. If you look at the city on Google Maps, you can see that all the cars are white. There was no official reason given for this directive, though it's known that Berdi Muhammadov is a fan of the color white, considering it lucky. I wouldn't be surprised if the reason's something similar to Melon Day. And here's the cherry on top. In Turkmenistan, there are no free elections, no free press, and citizens can't protest freely in the streets. Turkmenistan is one of the few countries in the world that regularly bans thousands of its people from leaving the country, and the president of Turkmenistan rewrote the constitution so he could rule for life. As you can tell, these aren't the kind of conditions where you can fight for freedom. With the Ruhnama and the cult of the president taking over the public sphere, people have always had little room to express themselves. Day after day, Turkmens heard endless praise for the president, first one, then another. Now I think they're praising the third. And don't forget about the total control. When Niyazov was in power, all foreign guests were under close watch. Guidebooks warned that restaurants and hotels frequented by foreigners were tapped, and Turkmen citizens could be arrested for talking to foreigners. For several decades of independence, poor people lived in near total isolation, and political opposition was crushed. Yes, it was there, but Niyazov used the supposed assassination attempt in 2002, which many thought was made up, as a pretext to go after his critics. They ended up in prison. The country saw a wave of arrests of anyone who spoke out against the government. The few activists and independent journalists who try to bring the real situation in Turkmenistan to the world's attention face harassment and intimidation. People who manage to leave the country admit that, from the inside, you don't even think life could be any different. In general, it's all complicated, scary, and fighting for freedom in such conditions is a challenge that only few are ready for. They were also trying to win people over, convincing them that the conditions in Turkmenistan were the best in the world. For almost a quarter of a century, utilities like gas, electricity, and water were free for the people of the country. This ended only 6 years ago. Moreover, for some reason, the country had free salt. All of this was connected to the natural gas reserves in Turkmenistan, but the situation in the mineral market's changing, as well as inside the country. We can only guess what the future holds for Turkmenistan. No opposition. In 2023, elections for a new parliament were held in Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan. Take a guess what political stance should the members of this parliament have? Okay, no need to guess here. It's expected that the new parliament will be fully loyal to the current government. There were 258 candidates running for 125 seats in parliament, representing 3 political parties as well as independent candidates, and absolutely all of them support President Serdar Berdi Muhammadov. Must be convenient when no one ever disagrees with you. President's song. There's one side of the life of the second president of Turkmenistan that I haven't mentioned. He writes songs, and these songs break records. In 2015, a huge choir performance took place with 4,166 people, which made it into the Guinness World Records. The choir performed a song written by Gurbanguly Berdi Muhammadov called Forward Only Forward, My Dear Country Turkmenistan. This achievement was marked as a record for the largest number of people singing in turn, and a representative from the Guinness World Records confirmed this fact. Originally, the song wasn't even a song. The former president wrote "Forward Only Forward" as a poem, but later, according to him, the lines were so inspiring that they turned into a song. The ceremonial performance was accompanied by a video where the president played the synthesizer and sang along with his people. The coolest thing is that the Turkmen choir set a new record, surpassing Google's achievement when 3,798 employees performed Pharrell Williams' Happy in Dublin, Ireland. Anyway, it's just the usual thing in Turkmenistan. Toilet inspection. How else can you show respect to the president? Well, for example, by thoroughly checking the toilets. It's not even a joke. It's real news about the country's reality. After rumors that people were using newspapers with the portrait of the former president for hygiene purposes, the authorities were ordered to investigate such cases. The task was handed over to the police, who began checking both public and private restrooms for signs of the use of images of President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov as toilet paper. It all started in the northern city of Dashoguz, where several kids were detained and brought to trial for defacing images of the then-acting president. Yes, the kids were put on trial. This kind of thing happens in Turkmenistan. In one case, school children stomped on a photo of the head of state, and in another, they drew a mustache and beard on his portrait. Additionally, the police found fragments of newspapers in the restroom, and some of them had the image of the head of state. It soon became clear that this was quite a common practice, after which the school principal was fired, and a large investigation was launched into the use of newspapers with pictures of Turkmenbashi. How the story ended is unknown, but the president's face kept popping up in the newspapers, and it's unlikely that toilet paper became more affordable for ordinary people. Burning cigarettes. Remember I mentioned that the former president of Turkmenistan is a big advocate of a healthy lifestyle? Well, thousands of cigarettes were destroyed in Turkmenistan as part of an anti-smoking campaign that Berdimuhamedov himself initiated. The burning of cigarettes became a symbolic event aimed at drawing public attention to the issue of smoking and its impact on health. And although smoking is officially allowed in Turkmenistan, the authorities have been actively promoting tobacco-free living for many years. On top of that, one of the leaders of the agency dealing with illegal substances was warned that they'd be fired if immediate steps weren't taken. As a result, kiosk and store owners in Ashgabat began selling cigarettes only to trusted customers and friends. I remind you that there's no official ban on smoking, but under heightened scrutiny, vendors had to act carefully to avoid trouble, like hefty fines of up to 10 monthly salaries. Also, as part of keeping the population healthy, there are active campaigns to destroy truly forbidden substances. Huge bags of them are burned in furnaces. And something tells me that very soon the same thing will happen to cigarettes, since Turkmenistan plans to completely get rid of them by 2025. You owe me a like. See you later.